much, and thank you everyone for taking the time today. I realize time is your most valuable asset, so we appreciate you spending the next hour with us. As someone pointed out earlier before the session, someone said really the title here is a misnomer. It's not really tomorrow's technologies, it's today's technologies, right, with artificial intelligence, especially over the last 6 to 9 months, right? We've seen the explosion of generative AI technologies like ChatGPT and others, which just out of curiosity, how many of you have used a generative AI technology, even just prompting? So some of you, how many of you haven't seen a generative AI technology? Haven't seen ChatGPT or Bard or anything? It's okay if you can raise your hand if you didn't see it. Okay, so most of you have seen it. If we have some time at the end and someone wants to see a demonstration of it, we can do it, but it's, if most of you have seen it, it's not necessary to do. Again, my name is Jeff Felice, and I serve as the president of CertNexus. We're a global certification body focused on vendor-neutral emerging technologies. So technologies like artificial intelligence, data science, cybersecurity, AI, and data ethics as well. And so today, we're going to really learn the basics of artificial intelligence. So we're going to start by defining what AI is and generative AI. We'll also then examine a brief history of artificial intelligence. It's really, I find the history very interesting, especially because it's a many decades old technology, but one that's really been influencing our lives both personally and professionally over the past several years. We're going to then define types of artificial intelligence. So this is going to be machine learning and deep learning. And then the approaches, we're going to dig a layer deeper and talk about supervised learning, unsupervised learning, what an artificial neural network is. We're then going to consider the approach to responsible artificial intelligence, developing responsible technologies that are ethical in nature. And then we'll discuss how AI is transforming cybersecurity. Obviously, it's transforming more than cybersecurity, but the focus of this is cybersecurity. And then we'll have Q&A. What I would say is if you do have a question, and it's a timely question, and please feel free to go to the mic. I'll try to answer questions at the end, but also any timely questions we want to get answered during the presentation, we can do that as well. I get tired of listening to myself speak for 60 minutes, so I welcome the questions. So the first says, I have a question of you. So just how many of you currently use technology that leverages AI at work? Okay, about 20%. How many of you are responsible for developing AI solutions? Okay, I might ask you guys to leave at some point in time. No, I'm just teasing. How many of you your job currently doesn't require you to interact with artificial intelligence? Okay, a small number. And how many of you at least use AI at home? Everyone should raise their hand. How many of you have done a Google search or Bing search? Right? How many of you used autocomplete on a text message? How many of you have bought an airline ticket? How many of you bought something on Amazon? Right? All of these things are using artificial intelligence. How many of you use social media, artificial intelligence? Right? We don't think about it, but artificial intelligence is as commonplace or more commonplace than technologies that we do think about often. It's actually now so pervasively used that we don't even think about it. Yet it is a technology that's still an emerging technology. It hasn't reached its full potential. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. So let's first define what artificial intelligence is. And I will state that there's still some debate over what is the true definition of artificial intelligence. But most can commonly agree that it's the ability of machines to exhibit human-like intelligence. So that's doing predictive analysis. It might be it's in the operation in a physical space of a robotic arm. It may be a number of other things that we as humans think that are uniquely to humans, or at least sentient beings, that now AI is able to do some of those tasks. So that's the basic definition. So, and as we look at the history, we'll see where that started. But if a machine can do something, and again, autonomously is the criteria here, right? Because machines can do a lot of things, right? You even think about an operation of a drone, right? If it's human powered, that drone is really not doing this autonomously, right? It's not performing a task other than being controlled by a human. Now, if you have an autonomous uncrewed vehicle, whether that's a drone or something in the water, on land, Now we're talking about something that has, again, artificial intelligence. And so what is generative AI? A lot of us know it as ChatGPT. ChatGPT has become the Band-Aid of generative AI, right? So we use it interchangeably, like you use Band-Aid, or you use, if you're over from across the pond, people, in the UK call vacuuming hoovering, right? And there's a lot of, essentially, Coke, right? I'm married to a woman from the South, and the first time we went out and wanted to order a drink, she said, "I want a Coke." And they said, "Well, what kind of Coke?" And I'm like, "What kind of, it's Coke." And she said, so, right, but we essentially have these interchangeable terms. And it's the same here. We have interchangeable terminology where a lot of people think of ChatGPT as generative AI, but generative AI is really the category of artificial intelligence technology. And what is generative AI? Generative AI, in its simplistic form, is our ability to input content and generate novel content, meaning new content that doesn't exist. So when you think about generative AI technologies, a lot of people think it's just going to go out to the web and it's just going to regurgitate content. Well, it's not doing that. It's actually creating novel content. It's going out and it is using these hundreds of billions of parameters. In the case of ChatGPT, it's using a huge amount of content that it's scraped. But what it's doing is when you input your prompt, it's coming back with novel content. This is content that supposedly doesn't exist anywhere in the world. It may be a compendium of other content, but it is novel content. And that's what generative AI is the ability to generate novel content. And that novel content can be in various forms. So many of us who've used ChatGPT have generated text. If you've used other technology from OpenAI, like DALL-E 2 or DALL-E 2, it actually generates images. Stable Diffusion's another one that has images as well. You can do 3D. You can do video. Meta and others now have the ability to do video. You have the ability to produce music. I'm not very musically inclined, and I actually was able to produce a song by just putting in certain, essentially prompts, or keywords if you like, and actually was able to generate music through a music generator. We're able to do code. For those that are programmers, I can tell you this is not going to replace a programmer. The intent is to help facilitate programmers in the work that they do. The fact is, I can go and produce code, but if I don't know how to code, I don't know, A, I don't know the questions to ask. B, if I get the code, I don't know what to do with it, right? But it can help facilitate coding, and we'll talk more about that as well. And it's a variety of other things as well, and over time, you're gonna see more and more generative capabilities, again, anywhere where we can produce what we call novel content. So with all this, some of us are probably getting slightly concerned about, is artificial intelligence, is it sentient, right? Is it iRobot? Is it HAL, right? Is it, the various, sci-fi, books and movies and film, et cetera, that we've seen, and it's not yet. The fact is, as capable as ChatGPT is, ask ChatGPT to draw an image. It can't do it. Ask it to produce audio. It can't do it. Ask it to operate a robotic arm. It can't do it. So what we have now is what we call artificial narrow intelligence. It's the ability for AI to approximate our human cognitive capabilities, but typically in a very singular way. Now, some AI may be able to do a multitude of things, but in most cases, almost all cases, AI right now is what we call narrow artificial intelligence. But you'll probably see in the media, there's a lot of discussion around, is AI sentient? Does it have the same cognitive capabilities that humans do? And the fact is, it doesn't. But some say in the next 5 to 10 years, we may achieve this. And this is what we call general artificial intelligence, or general AI. And this is where AI would have same or better cognition than we do, right? So ChatGPT can actually produce more answers more quickly than we can. But again, I can stand here, I can talk to you, I could wave a hand, I could do a numerous things that ChatGPT cannot do. With general artificial intelligence, the thought is that AI would be able to do a multitude of things and learn how to do those things potentially independently. Now, Google at DeepMind, they actually currently have a technology, it's called gato or gato, or however you want to pronounce it. I use the Spanish term gato, G-A-T-O, and that actually is learning, if you want to look at it on Google it, it's actually learning how to do new tasks, and it's teaching themselves these tasks somewhat independently, right? Still someone is providing with algorithms, with data, et cetera, but it's learning how to do things it didn't know how to do before. Yeah, it still hasn't achieved general artificial intelligence. And there's another concept called superintelligence, which is really where robots rule the world. We hope we never get there. If we do, we may not ever have this conference again. So, but really, again, we're at artificial intelligence, narrow, and we may achieve narrow. And as we talk more about ethical and responsible technologies, you'll see why that becomes more important. So, a brief history of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence was initially started in 1950 by Alan Turing. Many of you may know who he is. He was a UK scientist. And he actually created what the Turing test, essentially, which was a simple binary yes-no. Was a machine able to complete a human task? And so it was yes-no, and that was the advent of artificial intelligence. In 1956, the term AI was coined at Dartmouth College. And then we had our first few forays into artificial intelligence. Unimate was a robotic arm that worked independently on an auto manufacturing floor. We had ELIZA that was able to do some natural language processing. Think about what Siri does today, right? Siri is able to understand speech, generate speech, et cetera. ELIZA was able to do some of those in a very simplistic format. And then we had Shaky, which became the downfall, not really, but it was an example of more general capabilities. And then we had what we called our first AI winner. And you think about it, most technologies grow, if not exponentially, at least linearly, right? But with AI, artificial intelligence, there was a paper that came out of the UK that stated, listen, artificial intelligence is a false promise. We're never going to achieve this. It's something that really is a matter for the film and novels, et cetera. And so there was little investment at that time, very, very little research. And so we went through what we call our first AI winner. Then we had a period where there was a rebirth around expert systems, the ability to do one thing. That lasted for a very brief time, because then we had the advent of the personal computer, which ended up on corporate desktops. But then in 1997, IBM produced Deep Blue. Anyone know what Deep Blue was famous for? Chess. Yep. Chess. Yep. So Deep Blue was this huge investment made by IBM, and it could do one thing, but it did it really, really well, and that was play chess. It actually was able to beat the Grandmaster champion Garry Kasparov at chess, although Kasparov will say that he gave up, just because he was not wanting to play a machine anymore. But the fact is, it became that capable, and we'll learn about a type of learning called reinforcement learning that allowed it to do that. But that ignited the interest in artificial intelligence again. So then we saw a few other initial forays into it. Probably what's the most interest is the Grand Challenge. This was the ability for vehicles to, in an uncrewed, autonomous fashion, to be able to circumnavigate a road course. The first year, no vehicles were able to do it. The second, a handful were able to do it. But then what really changed the trajectory of AI were these enabling technologies. When we started with the cloud, AWS is probably the first enterprise mass instance of the cloud. Big data, right? Our ability to store data, not just in object-oriented databases, but in these vast data warehouses and data lakes, et cetera. And then we had the advent of the GPU. So many of us are probably familiar with CPUs, right? But a GPU initially was created for graphics, graphical processing unit. Now they're trying to rebadge it as general, or GPUs is no longer graphic, but GPU because of its use. But the idea was that these, where a CPU was like a sports car and could actually process information really fast, but less information, the GPU is more like a large SUV. It can carry a lot of information, has a lot of throughput. And so these three technologies were actually near simultaneously launched over a 3-year period, and this really enabled for us to start to invest more heavily because we had more computational capabilities. So then you saw in 2011, IBM launched Watson, which became their enterprise AI solution. Siri, although the first instances of Siri was really a number of rule-based just programming, it was supplanted by AI. Google Brain, and then we started to see really think about it, in the last 10 years is where we've seen this huge advancement. OpenAI, which has famously created ChatGPT, its sister products, DALL-E 2 and others. Google with DeepMind, so Google now has Bard, which is a comparable product to ChatGPT. They have other products in the coding space and also being used in their Microsoft Office is now using ChatGPT. Google is now using Duet in their Office applications, et cetera. And we can see essentially this explosion really in the last 2+ years. And really, for most of us, it's been since really last October when ChatGPT, or November, when it became available for, if not commercial use, at least for what I call testing use, right? Because it's still, you think about it, it's not a fully operational model, but it's, and the fact that they can guarantee the results, but they're actually getting a lot of useful feedback by people just playing with ChatGPT. And so we're seeing that today. So you can now see there's a whole bunch of different technologies. We talked about GPT-4, which powers ChatGPT. There's Bard from Google, Duet from Google, Llama from, which is also open source from Facebook, et cetera, and other technologies here as well. So, and the fact is that we're now at that, we're surpassing the Moore's Law, right? Where technology is going to double every couple of years. That's really from a chip perspective. But if you think about the use of these technologies, it's going to be growing more rapidly than that, right? It already has been, and we've been seeing that. So that's some background, right? We've defined AI, generative AI, and give you a little bit of history. Now we're going to, again, go one layer deeper now and talk about the types of AI. So the first is machine learning. So how many of you are programmers today? Okay, so I'm going to slightly embarrass myself. So with programming, programming's rules-based, and I'm oversimplifying here, right? But it's oversimplifying if-then statements, right? If this, then that. So if I select a cell in Microsoft Excel, it bolds. If I type 1, 2, 3, it displays 1, 2, 3, right? It's not trying to think about what I'm intending to do when I'm typing 1, 2, 3. It's not trying to add it. It's not trying to multiply it, which uniquely gets to the same number. But what it's doing is it's just displaying if I do this, then do that, right? And that's how most of our applications work today, they're rule-based. Where machine learning differs is that the algorithm is intended to learn. It's not static. You don't have stasis at any point ever with artificial intelligence. And this is why it's so important operationally to be able to maintain it as well, because the results you get today, like if we release Microsoft Office today, or Microsoft Office does, or Microsoft does, it doesn't change, right? 3 years from now, unless they make any updates, it's the same application. Artificial intelligence will continue to move. And the reason for that is because it continues to ingest more data, and the intent is that it's going to learn from that data. So how do we get how does machine learning work? Well, what we do is we select an algorithm, and different algorithms can do different types of things. We'll learn that it can do classification, clustering, et cetera. And then we present it with data, what we call training data. And with that training data, we're training the model to be able to make predictions. And what will happen is it'll make those predictions, it then will evaluate those predictions, right? What our traditional applications don't do. It then will learn from them, and then it will improve the model. So the idea is that we're going to take an algorithm, and we're going to present it with information. Just think about fraudulent activity, right? And let's just use payment cards, because payment card companies use this. They take a huge set of data, and what they do is they run it through to train the model to say, this is what fraudulent activity looks like. And then as they start to run data, more and more data through that, the model gets better and better. So the model will know, hey, you know what? Jeff actually drove over here today, and that's a typical type of transaction. So if he buys gas, that's the type of thing he does. Jeff typically doesn't travel to Brazil, stay at a a high, 5-star resort and drive a Lamborghini for business, right? It's not what I typically do. Maybe someday I will, but I typically don't do that, right? So it would flag those transactions, right? But the fact is that I traveled internationally earlier this year and it didn't flag any transactions because it was within the norm of not only my spending, but as we'll learn about clustering, it's the people that are clustered like me with how they would typically spend. And so this is how AI does it with machine learning. It learns based on the data we present it, and it continues to learn over time. Deep learning is a little bit different. Machine learning is, we actually are, I don't want to say dictating, but we're telling the model more about what it needs to know. Deep learning is, hey, we're going to set up a bunch of parameters, and if these are weighted things we'll talk about in a second, and essentially we're going to let the model start to make some decisions. So in this case, it's a very simple example, is we're going to present it with an image, and that image is then broken down into shapes, right? So we have a crescent moon, a triangle, a rhombus, ellipsis. Then it's going to say, hey, well, you know what? These shapes are actually parts of a face. We have eyes, nose, ears, etc. And then it actually assembles that and says, hey, this is a face. Is it a human face or a rabbit face? And it correctly predicts it's a human face, right? So when we look at our phones, and maybe you have an iPhone or whatever, and every now and then it'll assemble, like my wife's birthday was last month, and I got a little video with all these photos of my wife. Well, how did it know that? Well, my phone, through algorithms, knows what my wife's face looks like, right? And so that's what it's essentially doing at a very basic level. The fact is, the way it works is we have these nodes, as much like we have in our brain. Our brain is, those nodes are connected by synapses, right, with electrical currents, which allows me to sit here and speak to you, to move my hand, to understand, to view, et cetera, all those things simultaneously. Well, it's the same thing how these models are constructed, right? It's not a human brain, but they've done the same thing. They take these nodes or neurons, and they connect them together in layers, and allows information to flow from one to the next. And that allows us, deep learning produces our most sophisticated types of artificial intelligence. So it is used in natural language processing. Again, think about natural language processing, and again, using Siri or whatever your assistant is on your phone or device, et cetera. And it has the ability to understand I'm asking. I usually do this when I do it at webinars. It's harder to do in this format. But if I was to ask Siri what the weather is today in Augusta, it's going to know that I'm asking a question, the content of that question, the context that I'm likely asking it in, and it's going to speak back to me, right? So it has this capability to process language naturally, right? We also have computer vision. So when you think about autonomous or uncrewed vehicles, right, whether in the air, land, sea, when you think about the ability for robots to be able to maneuver in their physical space, if you haven't seen it, it's a cute video, but Boston Dynamics, they have robots, and they have these robots doing this dance. And the reason why I say it is not because it's cute, but because the complexity and the synchronization of these robots. And part of it's computer vision, right? Understanding what my physical surroundings are and being able to operate in that as we as humans do. And then we have robotics, right? Which again is typically a robot by definition should be autonomous and use artificial intelligence. These are some forms of deep learning applications. There's many, many more, right? But the fact is that generative AI is a form of a deep learning application. So how do these concepts relate? Well, think about artificial intelligence of being essentially a container for a technology. It is a technology, but it's not. It's really a definition of things. No one says, hey, I'm going to go develop an artificial intelligence algorithm. They typically are going to say, hey, we're using machine learning, we're using deep learning. So machine learning, as we learned, is our most often used type of artificial intelligence, and deep learning is a subset of machine learning used for our most complex needs, although some people are starting to say deep learning is really its own independent technology because they differ so much in their application. But if you think about it, if you're out on the street later or having dinner and someone says, hey, what is artificial intelligence? We know it's the ability for machines to complete human-like tasks, right? Whether those are cognitive or in a physical environment. We know it's a technology concept, and we know that the most often used type of artificial intelligence is machine learning, and that deep learning is a subset of that and used for our most complex needs. What I would also say is that when you encounter artificial intelligence, typically in an organizational setting, if you're not doing one of those really complex things, most often you are encountering machine learning. Again, big tech companies, obviously with our government and other governments, they're investing heavily into deep learning, but a lot of just your everyday applications are, you'll see, in machine learning as well. So. Yeah, well, our government, here's what I will say. I'm very proud of our government for a couple things, and I'll talk one about it, which is the responsible technology. But yeah, here's the thing also, it just is side, because it is, right now, it is, it's a race, right? It's a race to who's gonna be first, right? So, and that is not only, in private industry, right? We can see it with Google stock. Google stock plummeted when Microsoft announced ChatGPT, right? And it's not that Google's not capable. It doesn't mean that Google doesn't have a ton of its own artificial intelligence, but the concern was Google owns the search market, right? We even say, did you Google something? We don't say, did you Bing something, right? But the fact is that ChatGPT was integrated into Bing first, right? And so that actually now what happens is, 80%, roughly 80% of Google revenues come through ad revenue, right? So if you're not displaying ads on those Google searches, that's going to hugely impact Google's revenue. So it's the same thing now when we look at our governments. It's the same thing it's the capability, and it's not only in warfighting, but it's also in operations, right? It's in supply chain management. There's a variety of uses that we're using AI that can better us and augment our human capabilities. And that's where the race is. Now, there is race in warfighting, and again, that's where I'm very proud of our government. I'll talk about it in a moment. But it is, and the fact is that it's almost, if you're not first, you need to be a really close second, and you need to be really capable with these technologies, because it is that transformative. I look at it as transformative is electricity, right? The combustion engine. I always say air conditioning, and people say, why air conditioning? Because most of us wouldn't be sitting here in Augusta, Georgia in August if it wasn't for air conditioning, right? So don't ever undervalue the invention of air conditioning, right? So you think about it, this is on that level. Don't go home and say it's an air conditioning, say electricity or whatever, right? So, but it is at that level of a technology. So let's talk about the approaches to AI. So we talked about machine learning, and machine learning has three dominant or likely approaches, being supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and reinforcement learning. So supervised learning, this is it's the easiest type of machine learning to implement if you know a lot about your data. So on the left-hand side, we have essentially these biometric measurements, right? Height, weight, and whether someone has good or poor heart health, right? And so this would be in any medical record. You'd be able to see this, and if you go across whether it's a state agency or a medical organization, they would be able to produce hundreds, thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands points of data that show people's weight, height, and their heart health, right? And there'd be a lot of other biometric factors that we'd include in here, maybe some of those even imaging, like in EKGs, et cetera, and things like that, but we're trying to have a simple example. The weight, height, and height are what we call measurable properties. Again, it can be measurable properties. In this case, it's biometric, but it can be measurable properties of anything, right? It could, if you were doing something in agriculture, you could do the salinity of the soil, the moisture of the soil, the minerals in the soil, right? There's things that you can measure, right? So essentially you have what we call features, and those are the measurable properties. And then we have the label. The label is the outcome. Does this person have good or poor heart health? And so then what we do is we take that and we run it through our model. And our model starts to learn, hey, with these biometric factors, it's more or less likely for someone to have good or poor heart health. So then what we do is we take a new set of data and we run it through the model, and the model it actually will make a prediction without the label. So if all the data had already been input and I'm a new patient, I come through, they put essentially my weight and height, but don't label what my outcome is, the model will predict that. And we're using this in healthcare and many other places today, but healthcare is a great example of this. There's actually been studies that have been done that these models are as good as humans at predicting whether someone is likely to have a certain disease state, potential disease state, et cetera. Now, these models haven't, again, operationally, we have to make sure they consistently produce that type of information. We want a human in the loop, so we always want a human verifying. But you think about it, I could actually train a model. You think, and this is bad math, and I don't know if anyone knows about radiology, because I don't, but I'm just assuming a radiologist, let's say, looks at 50 images a day. They do that, for, let's say, 200 days a week, or 200 days a year, right? And so you're looking at 10,000 images over a 30-year career, right? It's 300,000 images that you're gonna look at, right? I want the guy that's, probably 20 years in, his eyesight's still good, but he's got, 200,000 images under him or her, right? That's the person you want reading your image, right? Well, think about it. AI can read that number of images in days. So it now has the capability and right, without the diminishing eyesight that the 30-year career person has, right? So again, in augmentation, right, I would never go to a lab that says, hey, we're gonna do an AI read on your radiology, and then we'll let the AI get back to you. Not happening, right? At least not for me, right? Not yet, anyway. But I would want a human in the loop, but I would want the AI to be potentially part of that process. That's what's happening here, right? We're telling the machine learning, this is what we want to know, and the machine learning algorithm, in this case, the supervised learning algorithm, is essentially outputting that to us, and it does it what we call classification. In this case, it's a very, it's a simple classification, it's a binary yes, no, but that's what supervised learning typically does, is classification. Unsupervised learning is like supervised learning, except for we don't tell it what the outcome is. What we say is we still present it with features, right? So we have measurable properties here. In this case, we have age and gender, right? But you can see we're not telling the algorithm anything about the individuals. All we're saying is that they're of these age and this gender. And what we're happening here is the model now is doing what we call clustering. So supervised learning is classification, right? We made a very binary example. In this case, it's clustering, and it's clustering in this case by age. It could have clustered by gender, or if we gave it other criteria, other features, measurable properties, it could have classified it by a whole bunch of different things. But now what we're doing is we're relying on the artificial intelligence algorithm, in this case, unsupervised learning machine algorithm, to essentially tell us something we may not know, right? And this is where we start to get into more predictive and prescriptive. You think about a lot of things. One is, oh, there we go. That was kind of odd. Well, a lot of things we do today with data is diagnostic, right? We look backwards, and we try to diagnose what went wrong, what went right, et cetera. But it doesn't tell us anything about the future. We then ourselves will start to then use our own cognitive capability to say, hey, if this happened the last quarter or last year, it's likely to happen the next quarter or next year based on our experience right in this environment. Well, now with these models, what we're doing is we're getting to predictive and prescriptive capabilities where we can start to do simulations and start to simulate and predict what the likely outcome is, and in some cases even becoming prescriptive, saying here are options A, B, and C, and you should choose B, and this is why. So the models are getting much more capable because essentially we're not telling them, hey, this is what we want to happen. We're giving it the information so it can help us decide what is likely to happen and how we should go about doing it. Now again, Is this infallible? No. The fact is AI, and if you use ChatGPT or any of the other generative AI technology, you can get it to a point of what they call hallucination or confabulation, where essentially it is, gives you a distinctly wrong answer. Well, sometimes you're going to get distinctly wrong answers, but with AI that's well trained, well monitored, you can get better outputs, again, to predictive and prescriptive. And then there's reinforcement learning. Remember we talked about IBM's original model, Big Blue, right? Which was essentially, or Deep Blue, was essentially played chess against the Grandmaster champion, Garry Kasparov, at the time, and was able to beat him. Well, how did it learn to play chess? Well, it learned to play chess by playing chess. Essentially what it did was it used reinforcement learning, where it would take a piece, it would move it, and that either was, if it was captured or weakened the position of the, in this case, we were using the black pieces, then it would essentially be not reinforced. If it was a good move, it would reinforce, right? A reward is given. And so what happened was Deep Blue played literally millions of games of chess. So it could understand what the opening moves were, what the middle game and what the end game looked like. And so it was able to play a really sophisticated level of game of chess because it played millions and millions of games. It's going back to what I said about being able to read, potentially hundreds of thousands or millions of images in days or weeks as opposed to many years, although it did take a number of years for, in this case, for the AI to learn. So that's what reinforcement learning is. We see a lot in gaming. We see a lot in robotics as well, right? You think about a robot, right? Whether it's it's industry specific, right? It's a robotic arm doing a spot weld on a vehicle, or if it's a general purpose robot that can move around a physical space as we do as humans, or like humans anyway. Essentially, a lot of that's done through reinforcement learning. Again, some other, we talked about some other technologies like computer vision, et cetera, mixed in there. And so I talked a little bit about deep learning. And deep learning, we talked about these layers. And another name, if you have 2 or more layers, you'll hear a lot of times of artificial neural networks, or ANNs. And artificial neural networks, as we learned, is made up of neurons. Those neurons are separated into layers. You typically have an input layer, you have 1 or more processing layers, and then you have an output layer. And you can see the connectivity. The way it works is through parameters and weights. Essentially, and this is how ChatGPT works, and they call it tokenization. But what they do is it's predicting what's likely to be the correct answer. And it's given a weight to that. And you can see there's positive and negative weights here. And so the output is likely the most positive, whatever that's going to be, right? So you think about, for example, if you're going to type, the dog is running, right? Well, start typing the dog is, right? How does whatever your, mail application, let's not use the dog is running because they may not know that. Let's say I'm going there, right? How does it know that when you type I am going, it's going to type there, right? Essentially, this is what it's doing. It's weighting all the possible words that you could want after I'm going, right? It could be here, there, etc. Then how does it even know the right form of there, right? Because there's there, possessive, there's there, the place, there's there, the contraction, right? So it has to essentially it does all this weighting behind the scenes to get to the right output. And that's how natural language processing in a very simplistic way works, is essentially it's giving weights to the different decisions that it's making along the way. So we've talked a lot about the technology, and we'd be remiss if we talked about the technology and didn't talk about how to produce a responsible technology. So, why is AI ethics important? Well, for the first time, as we've been talking about, is that we actually have machines that are making decisions, right? So it's not someone in your direct line of report, it's not a peer group, it's not a peer-reviewed scientific paper, et cetera. It's a machine making a decision. So we need to make sure that these machines are making decisions that we approve of. And so, but how's it happening? Well, you think about the amount of data that we have. How many of you are wearing some type of fitness tracker or have one, right? How much data is that actually generating, right? If you think about it, Apple is probably one of the largest health companies in the world now, right? Think about that, right? I'm wearing a ring, an Oura ring right now. Oura knows where I am, when I'm vertical, when I'm laying down, when I'm active, when I'm not active, right? You think about it, the amount of data that we're generating is vast, right? Because we're not just saying, hey, we have these storage area networks and we need to make sure that the data is all tidy in an object-oriented database and we only have so much space on our SAN, et cetera. Now what we have is we have the cloud. It's extensible. It's near free, right? When you think about it, it's not really, but right, I mean, the storage is extensible, it's flexible, it's, we hope it's secure, right? So, but the fact is that we have the ability to store data without seeing it, right? I always think of the cloud as like a storage facility, right? When you put something in your storage facility, you don't care, right? If things get stacked on top of it, as long as you can still fit stuff in that 10 by 10 room, right? We do the same thing. No, you know what? If we outgrow the 10 by 10, we get the 15 by 15, right? And that's how we treat data today. We have a significant increase in computing power. We talked about those GPUs, right? And as we move towards quantum computing, again, something believe that we'll have quantum computing capabilities in the next 5 to 10 years. That's going to, again, make a huge jump in our ability to actually process information, machine learning or AI and otherwise. We have a huge improvements in our algorithmic capabilities, right? We now have literally, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people across the world that are now learning how to essentially either select or develop algorithms, right? 5 years ago, if we were in this room, we said, hey, how many of you are involved in AI in some way? Most folks wouldn't raise their hand. 5 years from now, every single one of us will say, hey, do you use AI somehow in your job? Everyone's going to raise their hand. So we have legions of people that are now involved in the technology. We have a lack of international regulation, right? There is no agreed upon regulation. The EU is developing the EU AI Act, which will govern in private industry, will govern much of the EU, which when they did their data privacy, again, outside of the US or outside of the EU had a huge significant impact. But even then, we don't have any type of international regulation. And again, we're having machines making decisions without human intervention. So the DoD, if you're not familiar, has actually been one of the first to create ethical principles. And there's a lot more. We actually do a separate presentation on this, which is responsible, equitable, traceable, reliable, governable. So you have to be responsible, right? Someone ultimately can't say, well, the machine did it, right? You can't do it, right? The dog didn't eat your homework, right? It was your homework. You left it next to the dog bowl, right, et cetera, if that's the true story. So, right, it needs to be equitable. So it needs to treat everyone in an equitable fashion, right? So the fact is that right now we have biased algorithms. Go to ChatGPT, or go to its sister product, DALL-E, and type CEO. Give me a picture of a CEO. It will give you a picture of a white male 87% of the time, because that's what the data's been trained on, right? So we're using now AI in our talent management systems. I don't know if the government is or not, but in private industry, we have AI systems that are selecting who our next employees are. Well, if you take a representative example of cybersecurity, where 75% of all of your employees are men, right? And you say, hey, we want to diversify. We want to hire more women. So what we do is we're going to get this algorithm. It's going to help us diversify because we won't have the biased, manager making the hire. And then you put all the data in it, and you say, here are all the characteristics we want of them. You're going to get 75% men on the other side of it, right? So you have to think about how do we train these models so they're equitable, right? We have to think about our data. Traceable. We have to make sure that we can trace how they're making decisions, right? when we get into these deep learning models, right now, if you were to ask OpenAI, who creates ChatGPT, which is the GPT-4 model, or Google that creates Bard, they can't explain why all the decisions are being made. You need to be able to explain, much like we do in our typical chains of command, why a decision was made and what was the result of that, right? And it needs to be governable. Again, the human in the loop. And again, that's where I'm really proud of our government, because our government is the only government in the world who has said that we will not allow autonomous technologies to actually commit a war-fighting action without human intervention. And that we're the only one so far that has said that. Now we hope others follow, right? So we're all doing the same thing, but again, this is why we have to do that. So the fact is that, and you can learn more about this, it's built on existing frameworks. So the fact is that when you look at our ethics framework from the DoD, it's based on the US Constitution, Title 10 of the US Code, Law of War, existing international treaties, and just standard norms and values that we would say most of us as a part of a human global population would adhere to. And why specific principles? Again, we want something that will essentially will be neutral, right? We don't want biased in unequitable results. We, again, are seeing new challenges, and to make sure, again, that we're seeing responsible use. And this is really an interesting thing about it. You don't think about today the responsible use of Microsoft Office, right? You think about the responsibility of the person who drafted a memo that may go against norms, right? But you don't think about the technology, right? Microsoft Office, Microsoft Word can't do anything you don't tell it to do, right? But now we have a technology that can do that. So we have to think about that the technology itself needs to be responsible. And that's not only the algorithms we select, but also the data we use to train it, and our interpretation of the outputs and how we continue to monitor and operate the model. So how is it transforming? So there's a lot of benefits of AI in cybersecurity, right? The fact is that, and before I get to this, going back to machines replacing humans, if we look at every technology that has been created, so I'll use this analogy. If this was 100 years ago, right, and we were sitting together in this now sweltering room, if we were sitting here together, and I said, how many of you are involved in agriculture, or your family's involved in agriculture? Almost everyone would raise their hand, right? 50 years ago, how many of you were involved in manufacturing? Almost everyone raised their hand, right? And so when we think about those technologies, we think about the technologies that changed, which took us from an agrarian, to a manufacturing-based society, from manufacturing to service-based, et cetera. And what we see is technology is typically fueling that, right? And so now we have a technology, artificial intelligence, that is going to be impacting our lives, our livelihood, but for the first time it's starting to impact people that aren't doing physical labor. And I think that's why there's a lot of concern, there's techno-stress, how is this going to impact me, et cetera. But the fact is what we'll probably see, the World Economic Forum did a prediction, is that they said, hey, yes, there's going to be a number of actual jobs that will move towards obsolescence, right? And we've seen this in the past. But the fact is there'll be a number of jobs that will be created. And there'll be a net roughly 10 to 14 million new jobs globally created from AI and data technologies. But the fact is we have to, right? I'm going to be 55 years old in a few months, and I'm thinking about it. I'm like, damn, one more time I got to reskill myself, right? But I need to reskill myself, right? Because the fact is, if I want to work for another 10 years, I need to make sure that AI is in my tool belt, right? So we have to think of it that way. So I want to, hopefully AI is going to do all our jobs for us, and we can just sit there and collect the check. But it's probably not likely to happen, right? So. Again, the benefits of AI, it can process large volumes of data. So if you think about it, if you're monitoring network traffic, right, or if you're trying to, again, determine if something's a phishing email or not, et cetera, think about how long it takes humans to do that. AI can do that almost instantaneously, and because they've seen it before, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of times, they're going to be very good at saying, hey, I'm going to flag this because this is likely some type of nefarious action. It can learn about new to you security threats, right? The fact is that as good as everyone in this room is at their jobs, criminals are highly motivated, right? As they are in the physical world, they are in the cyber world, highly motivated and highly creative, right? I always tell my wife, I said, you look at people that run cartels, and I think there's some of the, it's horrific as it is, like some of the ingenious things they do to try to transfer something, right? Because they have to do it illegally, right? So they're thinking ways that we're not thinking, right? So what happens is AI can help us think in ways that we may not think because we're law-abiding citizens. 24/365 protection, right? The fact is that, if you're, working a 12-hour shift and you're at the end of that shift, you might be a little blurry-eyed, right? Especially if it's your fourth in a row and you're just like, I just need to go home, right? Well, AI doesn't get blurry-eyed, right? It's assuming we're operating and maintaining it, it's as good as it was before. It has the ability to reduce errors. AI makes errors, we see that, right? But humans make errors as well, and again, if we augment one another, we can improve upon that. And we have the accelerated detection time, right? The ability to detect more quickly. The challenge, right? Lack of trained personnel, right? And how do we continue to train personnel, right? Let's just say you just got down, the latest threat vulnerability tool that had AI integrated into it, and they changed the algorithms. And you're like, now I'm using a tool that I don't know how to use, right? So you think about that. So the ability to keep ourselves trained. There's deficient research funding, right? The fact is we probably can't throw enough money at AI. It's truly one of those technologies, it's the nuclear equivalent, right? In some senses, and the fact that it can be, that destructive in potentially, and so we need to make sure that, we have capabilities that others potentially don't. Availability of computing resources. Our federal government's fortunate in that in the aggregate, you have access to technology and research, et cetera, that many others don't, but we still don't have enough. The fact is that all of us who are doing something in cybersecurity today should make sure that all of our cybersecurity tools have some level of AI integrated, otherwise we're putting ourselves at a deficit. Malicious or polluted data sets, I talked about that. We don't think about data a lot in the sense of how is it going to make a decision, but again, AI is making decisions, so whether that's data that we've generated or synthetic data that's been created to help train models, we need to understand that. False positives, right? AI doesn't have human cognitive capabilities to understand, it doesn't have a moral compass, right? It doesn't have the same level of understanding we have. And the fact is, our cyber criminals are using AI, right? Whether that's individuals, groups, the nation-state level, et cetera, the fact is that, and they will continue to use these tools, right? And the fact is it's allowing I liken it to this way. If you look at your common street criminal, there's a level of sophistication up to your art thief, right? And sometimes we romanticize art thieves because we're like, how did they do that, right? So, but the fact is that you look at it at the lower level, we're essentially now saying, hey, someone that's essentially doing a smash and grab, we're giving them a tool that may allow them to do art theft, right? And that's what we're doing with AI. So we got to be aware of the fact that they have more capable tools than they did, 18 months ago, 3 years ago. Cyber criminals are using AI in a number of ways that we can see. And again, I'm not going to tell you, you guys sitting in this room are likely to know this, right? All the things they're doing. But essentially, all the things that they're doing that are listed here, they're able to do it in a more sophisticated way. And I think that's really what's important, right? It's that smash and grab street criminal now being able to, you know what, I'm going to go out on the dark web. I'm going to license a technology that's going to allow me to be more sophisticated. So my phishing emails are going to actually be spelled correctly, right? They're going to have content and context in them that they didn't have before. I'm going to have a better understanding of what the structure is in an organization and who's likely to send who an email, what those contents would be, and how I'm going to get better at essentially getting information than I was before. And these tools are now becoming more available and more capable, And again, we're starting to see not only in the tools, but again, their ability to evade as well, or essentially to essentially cover up their tracks. And so we have to understand that these tools, as good as they are for us, and again, we want to use them, and it's improving our ability to combat cybercrime. The fact is that they're, again, using these tools as well. So some sample uses of AI in cybersecurity. We have the ability to, again, detect anomalies, right? It's really hard to do, and I think for those who have never been in a position where they've actually had to, whether you're doing threat vulnerability assessments, threat assessments, you're doing, any type of response to a cyber incident, et cetera, there's a lot of data, right? But also bringing that forward, right, and to be able to say, hey, when we're in the prevent mode, how do we better detect? Risk assessment, again, vulnerability scanning, as I just alluded to, and again, incident response, and our ability to deceive, potential threat actors as well. As you probably know, the DoD is invested. There's a directive, it was 8570, probably most of you are familiar with. The 8140 manual was published. That is going to come into effect over the next couple of years. And what's really interesting here, and the reason why I put this up here, not just to be an eye test, but at the bottom you can see we've now expanded it to also include software engineering, because software vulnerabilities can be hugely impactful. And then also you can see AI and data at the bottom. So now we're going to require that our AI and data professionals have the same level of access to training, education, and validation of those skills as we do across other areas like IT, cybersecurity, et cetera. So just one last question, and then we'll have questions. So what do you plan to do with AI in the future? How many of you plan to use AI? Everyone better raise their hand. How many of you plan to lead AI projects? Good, we've got a number of people. How many want to be a machine learning engineer, are a machine learning engineer, or data scientist, or want to be one? Yeah. And then how many hope to never use AI? I'll be honest, some days I do. Some days I have I hope to just go live on top of a mountain, surrounded by some type of electromagnetic field. It's not going to happen, but. So the key takeaways, AI is only as good as we train it to be, right? It's also the use of AI in cybersecurity is accelerating. You guys are probably feeling that more than anyone. We need to pair AI with humans, right? It's augmenting human capabilities, and we need to use AI responsibly. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions. And if you can just come to the mic, if you don't mind, it'll be easier for everyone else to hear you. I always say the first question is the best question, because it's the bravest question. Any question? Yes. It's about 94 degrees here. Is that what you're going to ask? No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I see the Hive coming out with some robotic stuff using AI. How viable do you feel that platform is?
The what platform?
So it's Hive mentality using drones to.
Yeah.
I see that big in the AI model.
It is. And it's interesting. I just did a webinar last week with a society that does uncrewed vehicles, and we had this conversation. And so the question was, what about the Hive platforms, right? So it's essentially swarmed uncrewed vehicles, typically drones. And how likely is that as a technology? And it's extremely likely. The fact is that these technologies are accelerating in their capabilities and use. And if you haven't seen it, you can just Google drone swarms. It's where drones are essentially, if you're not aware, have the capability in a multitude of them to act almost as a single unit and then do divergent actions. It's something that it's a reality. It's near reality today, and it will definitely be a reality in our near future, and something that we'll all have to be concerned about, whether it's surveillance, war fighting, just in our personal lives, to be honest. So, yeah, thank you. Great question. Thank you. Okay, thank you. And I'll be available for any additional questions. Do you want to just go ahead? Ask.
I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on like potential proprietary data compromise whenever you're utilizing ChatGPT as a platform and things like that, whenever it's continuously training on the input that you put in and you're putting like potential organizational data into the platform?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a fallacy that it's actually using your data for training data. So it doesn't use your data as training data. But what I would say is that we advise that everyone that's using those generative AI tools not to put any proprietary data into those tool sets, because you are opening yourself up to potential theft and potential misuse of that data. Because that data is getting stored somewhere. They're just not using it currently for training set of data, but it doesn't mean they couldn't in the future. So any proprietary data should never be input into those tools. Oh, that is a right. The commercial, right? Yeah, yeah. Right. The ones that are for I should have said that. The ones for commercial use, yes, definitely use in the feed. Yeah. The ones for non-commercial, yeah, or not. Yeah. Yeah.